Meanwhile, on the comic box. Map, 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 comics. I should have made that closer to like the Luke Cage thing. I thought about that right toward the end, where it could have been more like a bow, bow, no, but that's okay. I didn't get that far. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Comic Box. This is the third episode this week, which is good. We're rocking. Part of the Geek to Geek podcast network. I am your host, Rob, the friendly neighborhood comic geek. And with me this week, returning, is Void from the Geek to Geek podcast. Hi, Void.
I'm here. Hello. I'm back.
You're back.
I'm back already.
Which is fantastic. No, it's awesome because, and I said this in the previous week, where I needed to do a Luke Cage episode with you back in-house. I wish we had thought of that beforehand. We were like, yeah, we'll do this pre-episode and talk a little bit about the MCU, and it'll be great. And then I guess at the time we didn't think to schedule a second episode afterward to compare notes.
Scheduling is like the hardest thing as an adult. It's crazy to try to get like two adult schedules to line up. Man.
Yes. Well, especially you have kids. I don't. But you have children, and we both work freelance, which means you don't know what your schedule is going to be that day until that day, and then it's going to change during that day.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're waiting for a client to get back to you, and suddenly it's like, oh, 2 clients got back to me today. Well, I can't record tonight.
Right. But we made it work. We're here now.
Yes. Yes, we are. So let's kick it off with the Weekly Geekery, which thank you for allowing me to steal that from the... What do we call it? Do we call it the Mother Podcast?
I just call it the Geek to Geek podcast. But yeah, I guess it's kind of the flagship podcast, maybe? Flagship of the network? I don't know.
Motherland!
Yeah, there you go. No, not that. But yeah, I love that you've taken it and that you do it every week. And now it's like, if we do add more podcasts to the network, I kind of want everybody to do it, and we should all just call it Weekly Geekery. It's perfect.
I agree. No, absolutely. So I'll let you kick it off, man. What'd you do this week?
Well, I want to talk because I listened to your episodes, and Liam was talking about the Power Rangers trailer, and It sounded like he was unimpressed, and I expected nothing going into it, and I really, really want to see the movie after seeing it. Like,
why?
I had zero expectations. I thought that I would watch the trailer and just kind of laugh it off, which is what he seemed to do. And I saw it, and I was like, okay, well, I need to see that movie now, and I don't know why. It just, something with like the nostalgia and the way they presented it, it just clicked with me, and now I really want to see a Power Rangers movie.
I think the issue Liam had, and I'd say the one I had as well, I didn't watch a ton of Power Rangers as a kid, but certainly enough, was that it didn't hit the nostalgia notes. Like, they're called Power Rangers, you sort of see them start to turn into, you know, the movie versions of the suits at the very end of the trailer, but the rest of it seemed pretty unfamiliar. I don't remember at any point during during the show when they were like, we're going to jump and test our powers. And I just kind of remember them being like teenagers with attitude who were already martial artists or gymnasts or whatever. And then they're like, here's your costume, go fight. Here's a dagger. It works as a flute for some reason. Roll with it.
Yeah, you know? I love the reinterpretation of it. Like, it's enough of the core concept, but they've taken it and they've redone it for a modern audience, which is what I want. I don't want to see the same thing again. I've seen that enough over the years. You know, like, I saw that as a kid, probably like every day, you know, when I was who knows how old. But you watch Power Rangers every day. Like, I don't need to see the exact same thing again. I want the core concept reinterpreted for the modern age. And it looks like we're getting that. It doesn't mean it's going to be good. Doesn't mean I'm going to love the movie. Doesn't mean I need to even, like, see the movie more than once. But the trailer convinced me to go see it once. And maybe not even in theaters. Maybe I'll wait till it comes out. But I need to see it now.
I think the big thing that hit for me was, and this very much ties in as a Green Lantern fan, is the difference between being chosen and accidentally happening upon something. Because it seems like the coins or whatever, they just happened to find. And again, I don't remember my regular Power Rangers lore, but it seems like it's a meteor and we just happen to be a diverse group of teenagers who wear primary colors every day versus I'm choosing you, Zordon head in a lava lamp, who's like, I'm choosing you kids because you're diverse or because you represent whatever. And I think that's such a big deal. That is such a massive element to a story of you have been chosen for this versus, you just happen upon it. Because that's sort of the whole Green Lantern thing is Hal Jordan was chosen to be Green Lantern. Kyle Rayner just happened to be in the right place at the right time. They retcon that later, but it was such an important part of the character because it's that difference between figuring it out on your own and being chosen and trained in and that sort of thing. So again, it doesn't really matter to me. I don't think it's a movie I'm going to see unless somebody's like, we're going to see this movie and we're going to heckle it, because I always like heckle fests, as I call it, where we watch bad movies and make fun of them, like MST3K. I think that's the only situation in which I'm going to watch it, because otherwise it's just another, we're going to make it grim and gritty and we're going to update it, and then it's not really going to reflect. Like I said, we were talking about this on the Geek to Geek subreddit, which is subreddit Geek to Geek cast, and I had brought up the Battleship movie, like,
yeah,
you're taking an item and you're reinterpreting it, but if that's really the main thing you're keeping is they wear, I don't know. I guess the core concept from an executive producer's standpoint, they're teenagers, they have superpowers, there's robots, versus the deeper concept that actually resonated with the audience, which is, something about the teenagers. I don't know. I never found any of them relatable. Maybe Billy, because he had glasses, and that was as far as that went.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what they do with it, basically.
You think Billy's going to wear overalls?
Maybe. That'd be funny. But yeah, besides Power Rangers, the new Doctor Strange trailer, it didn't get me more excited for the movie, but I'm still excited for the movie, and I'm definitely going to see it right when it comes out, which I haven't seen a movie lately right when it came out, but that'll probably be the next one. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that I finally got around to watching X-Men Apocalypse, which it had kind of been on my radar, and I just waited for it to come out digitally at home. And I feel like after watching that one, like, it wasn't a great movie. Like, I'm glad I didn't see it in theaters. The plot was entirely predictable, and it was it wasn't bad, but it wasn't good. It was just, it's a comic book movie. But by the end of it, I feel like they've finally gotten rid of all the baggage from the original trilogy. And I feel like they finally have assembled a new cast that could be really good going forward. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Maybe.
I think so, but it's also, it's so tough because I very much champion the thought of let them tell their story, because there's always going to be another one down the road. How many times has Spider-Man or Batman been rebooted in our lifetime? But at the same time, but at the same time, when you see something interpreted so oddly, it's tough not to let the nerd rage seep in there a little bit. I also thought Apocalypse was an okay movie. I guess they're set up fine for future stuff, but you kind of felt like that after First Class. Like, immediately after First Class, you had that thought, and then suddenly with the second rebooted, I guess, of the new trilogy, if we want to call it, Days of Future Past, they're introducing the original X-Men movies into it to try and combine the two universes. So they could have stuck with what they were doing, and they had the familiar elements of the Cerebro and the way Cerebro was, and that whole thing. Like, they had some of the ones, but they were clearly trying to say this is something completely different. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It just kind of it made me feel a little bit more optimistic about the potential of the next movie, I think, is what I was trying to get at. Like, the cast they've assembled, it has the potential to be good now, but like I said, the movie itself was kind of meh. I don't know. But
it was utterly forgettable.
Yeah, it was. But that was kind of it for Weekly Geekery, for me, anyway.
Okay, well, I'm a whole, 3 days after my most recent one, so I don't think I have anything new. I did a big movie night this past weekend where I had some friends over and we watched 4 horror films or Halloween-themed movies. Or not even just Halloween-themed, because one of them we watched was the most recent Underworld, the 4th one. And then we watched, what else did we get in there? The first Addams Family movie. We watched The Conjuring, just because I wanted to see like a mainstream horror film that's been out in the past couple of years, because I haven't seen any. I haven't gone to see any. They haven't really interested me. Well, I suppose I saw The Babadook, so that was a lie. But anyway, we watched The Conjuring, which was okay. And then we finished out the night with Sleepaway Camp 2, which is just, I hope, an intentionally awful horror film, because it's bad, but it takes itself really seriously. And we made fun of that, which was good, because by the time we got to that, it was like 1:30 in the morning, 2 in the morning.
Yeah, I think BJ mentioned that on our horror episode on the Geek podcast. I think he said that one in particular is supposed to be a bad movie, but made that way on purpose. Yeah, and he's probably talking,
the first one certainly
okay.
is the one that sort of heralded it, where it's like weird twist ending, and yeah, just like, and these people are naked because... And yeah, so the plot of this one is a counselor is killing other counselors for doing bad things, very much sort of a Jason Voorhees thing. But it's blatant. There is no mystery at all. Like, the very beginning of the film is they say, this counselor is the killer. So it's not a whodunit at all. And the rest of the movie, it's just bad. Like, it's just a bad movie with bad acting and bad effects and bad everything. And apparently there's like 5 of these. So
that's sad. That's kind of weird, but
yeah,
I mean, I guess if you keep making money off of it, you can keep making them.
Yeah, and it's those types of movies have found a home. Like, bad horror films are much better than bad comedies or bad dramas, you know, because they're always kind of bad, because they always start from this point of absolute disbelief in horror movies, that it's more easy, I think, to slip into this is bad on purpose kind of thing. I think it works best with horror.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
And then I finished setting up my front lawn, though it rained pretty hard. It seems like everything survived okay. I have a giant web of, or a giant wall, I should say, of cobwebs with a bunch of fake spiders in it that leads up to my front door. And that got hit pretty hard by the rain. But I think it's okay. I haven't been out there to check on it since last night. But I got my graveyard set up in the front yard. I have a big window that sits over our front door, and so there are 2 big eyes that shine down that my wife and I made, which was actually her idea, and she did an amazing job with it. And yeah, spiders. Is there anything else that I have? No, I added some skulls this year to the graveyard, and some body parts like feet and arms sticking out of the wood chips that are underneath one of our trees, because I wasn't actually going to dig holes in my yard.
Nice.
I guess that is probably it. I haven't really had time. I started reading From Hell on my phone via the Hoopla app. I haven't gotten very far with it. And then I was also reading, oh man, what was the other thing I downloaded? The Revival, I think, but I haven't gotten to it yet. So I've downloaded that, and I plan on reading it. But yeah, like I said, it's only been a couple of days, so it's only been this past weekend. I went to a haunted house, I guess, was the other one.
Yeah, it's a busy week for the comic box, apparently.
Oh, it's an incredibly busy week. Well, like I said, it's scheduling. It is a wonderful microcosm of the freelance life, because everything just sort of happened at the same time.
Yeah, and that definitely happens when you're freelancing. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So that is it for Weekly Geekery. I don't have any news for this one. I wanted this one to be as pure as possible, Luke Cage. So we are going to go Luke Cage. I'm not going to call it anything. I'm not going to call it top of the week. Let's start with not a full recap, because it was a long episode that we did before going into Luke Cage, but just very, very briefly, what did you know going in from that one? Like, what would you say was your knowledge base going into Luke Cage?
It was like only what we talked about last time. Like, I knew nothing else. I mean, I guess going into it, I knew to watch for references to Power Man, maybe Iron Fist, and then I knew to watch for a couple key characters. So, like, you talked about Night Nurse and, like, Misty Knight and a couple other characters like that, you know? So just watching for key characters, I kept that in mind as I was going into it. And then, like, his catchphrase, his sweet Christmas or sweet whatever. But yeah, only the things we talked about and learned about last time.
Okay. And then I will say I did all of the research for that, so I had a pretty large knowledge base. However, there were still plenty of things, little Easter eggs and references that I missed, and we will get to those in due time. But first, let's go. Oh, you have a pre-question you added in
Oh,
here.
yeah. I was just curious, how fast did you watch it? Because it's Netflix. It all comes out on the same day. So how long did you stretch it out?
It took me a handful of days. I want to say less than a week, but it could have been 4 or 5 days. I really had to try and squeeze in episodes where I could around work and family and everything else in there. I was not able to sit and binge.
Okay, and I was the opposite because, like you said, with freelancing, things get random. And the day that it came out, I had finished all of my client work by like 9:30 in the morning that day, just because I had such a busy week before it. So my kids were at school, and it was like 9:30 a.m. on a Friday morning. So I sat down and I just watched Luke Cage. I think I watched 10 episodes the day it came out, and then I watched 3 episodes the next day, and I was done. So it took me 2 days to finish the entire series.
And how did that work for you? Do you feel that was the correct way to watch that show?
I think any way you want to watch it is fine. I might have stretched it out a little bit more. I feel like it was so compacted for me that I wonder how much I retained as compared to if I had stretched it out over more like a week, like you did. But I enjoyed it. Like, I liked the time I spent with it. I didn't feel like it was wasted or anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, not at all. It's just that idea of the show really obviously is episodic, obviously, duh, but it's not one long cohesive story either. It has a very clear break at episode, what is it, 7?
Yeah, I think it's either 6 or 7, but yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And that would be a great spot to take a break.
Right, and there's another break later on. So it's the idea of if this would be better if you sort of take it in pieces. I don't think it's a show that you can't binge. You know, there are just some shows that are just so heavy, or, I mean, I guess in some cases just because they're long, if it's a, 23 episode season or something like that. But there are some shows that you can only just watch a couple of episodes and you got to walk away from it. Even if it's good, it's just there's too much going on there, or it just doesn't have that power. I feel like Luke Cage, you certainly can. You certainly can go from episode to episode with Luke Cage. I don't think it's, too grating or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like, there's some sitcoms and stuff where you can watch a couple episodes, but you got to walk away after a couple just because it becomes too much and you're not enjoying it as much anymore. I don't think that's Luke Cage.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And it doesn't go the extreme in the other direction either, where it's like Breaking Bad. I didn't watch Breaking Bad until it was done, and so I had the potential to binge it. But man, that show gets dark and it gets heavy, and like if you try to binge that, you're just going to be depressed, Like,
yeah.
That's the other extreme, where if the show is too intense or too dark, you need to take a break. And this one doesn't really fall on either of those extremes. It felt very bingeable.
Yes. Okay, so let's start getting into the meat, I suppose, of the Luke Cage thing. I want to start with stuff we liked, and we don't need to go into super specifics, but it's just in general things that you really liked about it. Then we'll go into any of the things we didn't like about it, and then we can start getting into like specific characters or plot points or whatever. And then I just have a ton of trivia and Easter eggs and things that I think would be fun to know after the fact. And I think before
Perfect.
we even do this, let's be clear, folks, this is full spoilers for Luke Cage. If you have not seen Luke Cage, hold off on listening to this. And then once you're done, we want you to come listen to the podcast, and then you can join us on the subreddit for a proper full conversation into all things Luke Cage.
Yes, exactly.
So what did you like? I have the things here on the outline that I think I liked.
Yeah, the one that you and I both definitely, I mean, I agree with most of the points that you have on here, but the one that stands out about all the others was Claire. I think she is a fantastic character, and like it was one of the most compelling things to watch was her character throughout the whole thing, even though she's not in the whole thing, but you know what I mean, anytime she's on screen.
Yeah, and I think part of that is the character, but so much of that is Rosario Dawson.
Yeah, she's really good. She really pulls it off, and I don't know, it felt like she was a better realized character than a lot of the people who were in the entire show. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fair to say. And I think part of that, again, is due to the performance, is she delivers it as somebody you absolutely believe exists in this world, where she's like, I have seen, undead ninjas and all this stuff. She's like, and here's the thing that I decided I'm going to do with it. I'm just going to accept it and deal with it. And you're like, that's probably what people would do. Because we talk about realism in these movies and how everybody else reacts knowing that aliens come down from the sky. And there's a dude running around with a giant enchanted hammer that shoots lightning at people. And someone flying around in a suit of armor. And how do you gestate that, And I think this did a little more of that than some of the other Netflix shows where they actually bring up, like, look, aliens come down from the sky. I just got to keep my head down and work this job. I do find a little bit of like unbelievability. I don't know that that's a word, where she's saying like, this is what I want to do. I'm going to help super people. And it's like, I get it. That felt very comic booky to me though. Like that decision, rather than saying, I need to help people that are affected by these things. And it's like, cool, but wouldn't that include studying, like doing research? Instead, it just seems to include, I'm just going to kind of hang out with a needle and thread until somebody needs stitches.
Yeah, I don't know. Part of it feels like it's this slow, like, character growth and payoff over the course of, like, everything, in the Netflix MCU so far. So taken on its own, like, in just Luke Cage, it feels kind of out of place. But I feel like with the other 3 seasons of TV, plus this one, 4 seasons, it's kind of earned at this point, and I'm okay with it. It didn't bug me when she was like, I want to help people with powers, because it's like she's been through enough that she can just say that straight up now. Whereas if this was the first season of TV she was in, it would have felt really weird.
Okay. So next item on the list for me, and I'm going to skip down. I'm not going to start at the little top of the thing, because the first thing I said is simply the show. I did enjoy the show. I am not putting it up as my favorite Netflix Marvel property, but I did really enjoy the show. The thing I will say I absolutely loved is the Method Man episode and then the social reaction that follows to Luke Cage. And now I know that I'm saying this as a white dude who grew up in the suburbs, very middle class, watching a show about a bulletproof black man in Harlem. So I understand that I'm probably not the target audience for this show, but I loved that aspect. I love the people walking around with the bullet hoodies and the fact that this type of thing in this type of community is going to create a social reaction of that type. And I also liked the lyrics. I liked what Method Man threw down on the radio as well. Just that whole idea I thought was perfect, and what is so different from every other one of the shows that we're going to get. That's not going to be an Iron Fist thing. That's not going to be, with Iron Man, you have the big Stark Expo with girls dancing around in Iron Man costumes. With Captain America, you have a museum exhibit about World War II and the heroism of soldiers during World War II. With Daredevil, you just have people who don't like him. Like everybody. Because he's just a guy running around punching people in the face because he feels it's the thing he personally needs to do. And so, but with Luke Cage, this is the community character. This is the character that has a community around him, and so the community is going to react as he reacts. What happens to him happens to the community sort of thing. And I really, really like that.
I like that part a lot too. I thought the bullet hoodies were very well done, and that whole episode was just... I liked that episode and the whole way that all of it was incorporated.
Yeah, probably the best episode of the series.
Yep, I think so. I also liked, just speaking of the fact that he's bulletproof, I really liked the episodes where he just, has a fight scene where he just owns everybody. I know towards the end they get to the thing where, there's a special bullet and it, hurts him. But, before that, the episodes where he just has his superpowers and people shoot at him and people punch him and break their hand, I wanted more of that. I thought that was really interesting because usually when you see the superhero fights, superheroes are putting in all of this effort. And he just walks in somewhere and just gets it done. And it's like he's the only hero that we've seen that you can really do that kind of fight scene with without it feeling dumb, because it actually fits with his power set. You know, like if Daredevil didn't look beat up and winded and exhausted by the end of a fight, it wouldn't seem like it fit in the universe. But Luke Cage can get away with that. And I kind of wanted more of it, but I liked what was there.
And I find that very, very interesting. I agree. One of my favorite moments of the early part of the season is where he's walking up and guys were shooting at him or whatever, but he just kind of taps somebody on the head. He just kind of says, all right, you know, he swats him aside like an insect, and the dude just immediately crumples and goes down. That was a fantastic moment. But I find that very interesting because in our pre-Luke Cage episode, right, our primer episode, you had said, I am not interested in a character that can't be hurt. You said they need to find some way to put him in danger, otherwise I'm not going to care about this character or his struggle. So I find it very interesting. Was it just the style or the fashion that it was done in that interested you then, that made you like it?
Yeah, it definitely changed my mind when I actually watched the show and I saw that the way that they executed those fight scenes, they were very interesting, because it becomes more about him trying to make a statement or execute a plan and less about putting him in danger. Because like you said, it's more about the impact on the greater community than it is about on him as a person and him as a hero. So I think that worked, you know, like when he's doing the raid and he grabs the car door and he just charges in there, like that kind of stuff really worked for me. And I was actually disappointed when they got to the part where they ended up hurting him by getting a super bullet, right? I wanted it to be something more along the lines of what you had talked about, like drowning him or suffocating, or like one of these other ways that you could hurt him that is not violence directly to him. I thought we would get something like that. And instead they're like, well, we just got a bullet that's better than other bullets. And that felt like a letdown to me.
Yeah, and I will get to that in the stuff I didn't like. I feel, yeah, there was some stuff in there that didn't work for me in that sense. And the other thing I'm going to throw out that I really liked, the hammer tech. I love that they tied it in, because you know that after Iron Man 2, we probably weren't going to see Justin Hammer again, which is a shame because they're setting him up as this direct, not villain, competition business-wise to Tony Stark. So I love that it exists in this world, and they're like, we got all this stuff, and it's hammer tech. However, I wish that something they had built had failed then, because that was the big thing we saw where they had the, what do they call it, the Patriot or whatever?
The stuff that just fails in the Iron Man 2.
Yeah. I would have liked to have seen something there as well where the hammer tech is there, but it's not very good. And the big question for me, though, is, and obviously we already said spoilers, so Diamondback shows up in the Diamondback costume. That is how he appeared in the comics. Shows up in a Diamondback costume towards the end and says it's custom hammer tech. But does that mean then that, and this might be looking into it too much, but does that then mean that there are more of these suits that hammer tech can make to make super strong humans? And if so, does that give us a sequel potential? Or, you know, obviously I don't think that's the case. I think it's very obvious that it's just, no, this is a one-off deal. That's why he said it's custom. And, you know, that's so we could get somebody in, we could get Diamondback in a Diamondback costume. But I don't know. I thought that was kind of odd. I would have liked it if it was something somebody had made themselves. I know that gets us into Iron Man territory where everybody somehow knows how to make their own suit of armor, but...
Yeah, it does seem like there's some plot holes there, but yeah. I think you're right. I think they said what they said to kind of cover the fact that it's a one-off. It's not going to impact the world to suddenly have people running around with these suits, that kind of thing.
Which is a shame, because that would be a cool, if nothing else, event sort of thing. You know, maybe it'll pop up in Defenders. Maybe one of the things they're going to have to face is a handful of hammer tech armored people.
Yeah, we'll see which parts they pull in for the Defenders. It'll be really interesting after we have all the shows laid out there.
Yeah, but in any case, I love that there was hammer tech in there. That was kind
that
of
was cool.
Just one of my favorite little bits. Was there anything else for you that was an absolute standout that you loved about the show?
I don't know if there's anything else that jumped out. I mean, I liked the show overall. Like you said, just the show in general, I liked it. I thought it was a good execution. It's a good fit for the like Netflix MCU, and it's not my favorite, but I could also see why it would be other people's favorites, because it is really good, you know? And it's not my least favorite either out of the Netflix MCU. So yeah, I just like the show overall, and yeah, I think I covered the main things that really jumped out to me.
All right. So we'll go stuff we didn't like. So I'm going to start this one off, and this is one just because it's sort of in the middle there where I understand the change. But in this show, Luke Cage is not a hero for hire. They say this very deliberately, where he says, I'm not for hire. And it's just that, as we talked in the primer episode, was such a big part of Luke Cage's character originally. Now, I don't think that's still the case anymore, but I'm not sure, because I don't read the Luke Cage comic on the regular, and I know there is a new Iron Fist and Luke Cage, or Luke Cage and Iron Fist comic out there. And so I get that they don't need to go all the way back to the blaxploitation roots of the character. I just thought that would have been a fun twist and would have made him different, rather than very much just sort of this superhero or Spider-Man, I'm doing right because, in Superman's case, I'm doing the right thing because it's the right thing, or more like a Spider-Man, I'm doing the right thing because I have a responsibility with these powers to do the right thing. You know? So I think it would have been interesting for there to have been at least something in there where he at least goes like, oh, I can use, you know, my powers for construction, or just something at some point where he uses his strength or the fact that he's bulletproof to make some money to help pay for something, and then he could decide that he's not for hire. You know, kind of like we got a tease with the costume, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
And then was like, this is ridiculous. I'm not wearing this, sort of thing. Like, I would have liked that, so at least we could acknowledge that part of the character, of how he started out as a more selfish character, or at least someone who was like, hey, I can't afford to do this all the time for free.
Yeah, it would have been nice to have like a mini character arc. It wouldn't have to be a huge thing, but I see what you're saying. Like, give him something where he does it for money and then realize that maybe he doesn't want to be like that.
Right. Exactly. I mean, in the comics, he's flat out starts out robbing banks. Obviously, we don't want him to do that. It's just he is such a good guy all of the time. And I guess there are some things he does which are sort of selfish, but, you know, it would give the character more of an arc, somewhere else to go. He very much is just, from the get-go, shows up and he's like, doesn't really swear, I don't use the N-word, I'm, you know, I want to just sweep hair and sit in the corner and read a book, sort of thing. Like, he very much establishes himself as this very good person right away. And we find also, and unlike the comics, they talk about how he was a Marine or whatever, and he was a cop or something ahead of time. Both original to the character, not at all in the comics. So originally we're starting it off as him being like, he made a decision as a young man, and he went to law enforcement and the military, and so Luke Cage is a good person. And I feel like just with his character, the only place we had to go was him not wanting to get involved, getting involved, wanting to run away and not running away.
Yeah, and something about his character, it's not exactly along these lines, but it kind of bugged me while I was watching the show. I felt like there was a disconnect between where we left off with Luke Cage at the end of Jessica Jones and where we picked him up at the beginning of Luke Cage of the show. Like, it felt like he took a step back in terms of like how advanced he was as a character. There was something there. Like, he seemed more, I don't even know what it is, self-confident, or like he kind of like knew where his place was in the world in Jessica Jones, and he was just trying to get by. And now suddenly we go to the Luke Cage standalone show, and at the very beginning, he's unsure about his place in the world again.
Right. And well, to be fair, I think the bar became his place in the world.
I guess. And then once it gets destroyed, yeah, okay, I can see that.
Plus, there was the whole finding somebody else with abilities, being put in a coma for a while with the shotgun fight. And yeah, I agree with you, though. I think there was more of a cool, calm demeanor to the character. He seemed more at ease with himself. I think there's clear reasons why he's not that way in this one, and we certainly get snippets of it. There are times where he falls back on that, and they call him corny. And that was another thing I didn't like. I thought there was too much callback humor, with the so corny and the always kind of thing. Like, I get it, and it's a little cutesy moments, but I think there was a little too much of that for me in this one.
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying, but I think they gave clear reasons why some of those things happened, why some of those things existed, or why there was that shift.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, I totally get that. And having watched the whole show, I understand it better now in context, but I think it was more of a disconnect from the feeling I left off with at the end of Jessica Jones and how I felt at the beginning of episode 1, of Luke Cage. And then it gets explained more as it goes on.
Right. The other thing, and this is one of the big ones, the shift in the middle of the season, the villain shift, where we think that Cornell Cottonmouth is our main villain, and no, he gets taken out, spoilers, halfway through the season, and then is kind of replaced by 3 villains. Because you want to say that Mariah becomes the replacement, but she really doesn't. She is still sort of swept up through the rest of the season. Shades steps up a little bit, but then we get the standard introduction of Diamondback. And so it feels like the season it's very much on a clear path at the beginning, and we're spending time with our villain, we're spending time with our hero. Then we say, nope, we're going to pull the rug out from under you, which is fine. I like that tactic. But then the show was on such uneven footing for the next couple of episodes, as I think they were trying to figure out, maybe they were trying to get us to figure out what was going to happen next. But it didn't work so hot for me because it wasn't nope, you get taken out, here's Diamondback, he's in charge now. Because we're hopping back and forth now between Mariah and Shades and Diamondback. And it didn't work. It wasn't as clean as I felt it could have been. And I understand maybe that's realism, but I would have liked that to be a little cleaner. And then there's also the question, I felt like Cornell was a very well-defined character, and I thought they did a good job with him. So there's always the question of, did we actually need 2 villains, or in this case, 4 villains, I guess, for this show? Does that speak to the show being weak, or does it speak to it being complex in a good way?
Right. And I don't think we needed all the villains we got. I really liked the first half with Cottonmouth, and I was sad to see him go as a villain because he was a really good, I don't know, just like a balance for Luke Cage. They're both kind of fighting for the community, but from completely opposite angles. And once you get Diamondback in there, he's just kind of nuts. And that's much less compelling to me. Like, I don't know. I understand his motivation and what they gave to him. And it was trying to be a more personal narrative. But I liked the standoff stuff that happened between Luke Cage and Cottonmouth a lot more than I liked it between Luke Cage and Diamondback. And then, like you said, Mariah and Shades felt kind of tacked on. Shades never really worked for me. There's something a little bit off about him. And I don't know if that's just the way they were trying to play the character and just make it seem that way. But then, like, Mariah, by the end of the season, she gets to a point where you're like, okay, she can be the primary villain going forward if you go and have a season 2. And I understand that, and I'm okay with that. Like, they developed her enough that could be really good. But like you said, it just kind of gets a little bit, I don't know, watered down by trying to be so complex instead of focusing on one.
Right. Like, personally, I think a better way to go would have been pull the rug out from under us and then shift the focus to Mariah, and we find out that this is Mariah's Wilson Fisk story. Like, because we start out with a already developed character, and they start giving us a little backstory to him and that sort of thing to make us think he's going to stick around. Pull the rug out from under us and be like, no, you're watching the origin story of Black Mariah.
Oh, I could see that.
And
that
then
would work
Shades
well.
is still there. He can still be your henchman and fall in line or whatever. And then let Diamondback, if you want Diamondback to be in there, fine. But then don't up him so much. He is this crazy other thing that now both of them have to deal with, which is sort of the case in the show. But really make him a wild card and don't dig so far into it. Because let's move over to Diamondback if we can.
Yeah.
Too classic evil for me. He was so like, I'm evil because I'm evil, and I'm your brother. I didn't need that at all.
No,
that
me
was
either.
trying to add some other sort of emotional impact to it. And the whole show is pitching the idea that your family is your community and your community is your family. The whole thing is Luke Cage feels like he's alone. He's got nowhere to go, but he's found a family with Pop, with everybody at the barber shop. You know, that's the story they're telling. And that's like Mariah saying, like, we're all one big family here in this community, but she doesn't mean it. You know, and Cornell talking about how important family is and that sort of thing. And the club, I guess for them, it's family versus the community. But in any case, it's the fact that I didn't need that. I didn't need the Diamondback backstory. Like, I'm okay with a little bit of it or closer to what was in the comics, which we can, I think, talk about. I think that's one of the Easter eggs I have down there. And the idea that, yeah, they were friends growing up, and this guy went into the mob, and Luke Cage went into law enforcement or whatever, into the Marines, and went to jail. He was such a classic, I'm doing evil because it's evil, and I like doing evil. And that doesn't fit in this type of story.
Yeah, it really bugged me too. And I think you put your finger on it better than I did. That was kind of what I was trying to get at a little bit. Diamondback just didn't work as well for me as any of the other villains. And that's probably why I liked Cottonmouth a lot better than him, because it was just a better fit for the story that they're telling. And it kind of ties into one of the things that I didn't like about the show is that just in general, it seemed like this was way more predictable than any of the other Netflix Marvel shows. Mm-hmm. Like, all of those threw me a bunch of different places in interesting ways. And I didn't really get that with Luke Cage. Like, I kind of knew who was going to die, probably when they were going to die, like the events that were going to happen before they happened. I was never really surprised by anything in this show. And that was sad because all of the other Netflix MCU shows surprised me in interesting ways.
Yes, and absolutely, because you saw it coming a mile away that this was just going to turn into a bro down, you know, them punching one another. You were hoping that wasn't going to be the case, but already, like, in their previous fights, Diamondback should have died at least like 8 times. Like, he fell from the upper balcony and landed on his spine on the arm of a chair in the theater, which, by the way, I don't know if that's on my list. I'm sure that that's one of the Easter eggs because Luke Cage helped run a theater in the comics instead of a bar.
Oh, cool.
You know, but he gets thrown through the doors and again on his spine smacks up against the like marble column. And there's just so much damage he takes that he just gets up and is fine with because evil? Like, this is before he gets the suit, unless he's wearing it underneath and we don't know it.
Yeah, it's just like he's the big bad, so we're going to let him keep getting up until we need a climactic battle, and then he can finally be defeated. And it was just kind of, I don't know, it was too predictable for me in a lot of ways. And even like Pop, like his death was, you know, you could see that coming from a mile away. It wasn't surprising at all that was going to happen at some point.
Yes. No, absolutely. And speaking of the fighting, you know, and with Diamondback, is because the other thing I have on the list here is, did I really need 3 episodes of Luke being shot and wandering around? I know they're doing that in order to sort of reset things for that last act where he's healed back up and he gets to come back at you. But I feel like you have him shot, you know, and then, like, they already did the I'm trapped under the rubble, so this gives us the opportunity to do flashbacks, which, by the way, and I didn't think of this until now, is very sitcom. We're locked in a closet, so we're going to do our flashback episode now.
I didn't think about that either.
Like,
that's
Fresh
funny.
Prince, Saved by the Bell. Clerks the cartoon did it, but that was intentional. They were making fun of the other flashback shows where you just get trapped somewhere and do flashbacks. I thought that was kind of... I didn't think of that until now. That's actually very funny. But the fact that, cool, make him be shot, and that'll give us an opportunity to look around and see the rest of the world, you know, while he's slowly trying to find his way somewhere. Give me 2 episodes. Give me an episode where he's shot in this episode, so we're going to take this time to look at everything else while he's slowly trying to figure out where to go. At the end of the episode, he can show up at, you know, wherever, and Claire grabs him, and then give me a second episode where they patch him back up. By the end of the second episode, he's good to go again. I didn't need him to be hurt for that long. I did like the idea that they shoot him and we're dealing with it, and then he gets hit again. which you're like, oh, that ups the ante, except that second shot apparently didn't do a whole lot to him.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was 3 whole episodes until I saw it in your notes here. And I guess it's something that I was binging it so fast that I didn't notice. But if you were watching one of these a night and stretching it out over like 13 days or whatever, that would probably get annoying. You'd be like, okay, he can get better now, whenever, get there.
Yeah. And I believe it was 3, because I'm trying to remember. He gets shot.
That
I think
sounds
it's
about
the
right.
second episode where he gets shot the second time. Third episode is they actually go to the doctor. Fourth episode, I think, is when they fix him.
Yeah, that sounds
So
about
I think
right.
he's hurt for 3.
So in terms of like stuff we didn't like, and I feel like all of these are fairly minor because we liked the show overall.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and like I don't want to take away from that because I really liked the show. I enjoyed my time with it. There was only one time that I got a little bit nerd ragey, and like I'm really good at suspending my disbelief. But I think I texted you right when it happened. I was like, "Have you seen this episode yet? Because I need to complain."
Yes, and I had not seen it yet. You're like, episode whatever 11 or whatever.
It was episode
like,
11.
Have you seen this yet? This just pissed me off, and I was like, wow, okay, but no. And I loved the thing it was. I knew what it was as soon as I saw it, I think.
So they're trapped in the nightclub. They're like underneath the nightclub in the sewers and the basement or whatever they are. It's not sewers, but it's basement level, and they're safe from the bad guys. And Misty Knight gets out her cell phone. It's a little bit damaged, but it's fine. So she calls the person outside who's in charge of the hostage negotiation, right? To try to let her know, hey, here's all this information about what's going on inside the club, which makes a ton of sense. That's great. You're finally safe. Call your boss, call the chief of police, call whoever is in charge of the hostage thing, and give them all the information so they can react accordingly. This all makes perfect sense. She calls, and they get like half of a connection on the cell phone. And I mean, this happens to all of us, right? You call someone, you don't quite get a connection. So what's the next thing you do in real life? Well, you hang up and you try again. This is a show, so you probably don't want to do that because it's boring to watch someone try to call and call and call. But in real life, if you try to call a couple times and you had half a connection, that means you still have like some connection. You have some form of data. The next thing that you do logically is you text somebody. She could text them everything that's going on inside the club, and it would send. It might take a little bit extra time to send because her connection isn't that great, but she could let them know all of the information they needed to react accordingly, and it would solve all of this miscommunication problem. And it goes back to like, those episodes of Friends before they had cell phones. Like, people just aren't communicating, and it's infuriating. I much rather would have had them like have her pull out her cell phone to make a call, and her cell phone is just broken. Like, that would have solved the whole problem, and I wouldn't have gotten, I don't know. Like, my entire suspension of disbelief was broken by that scene.
Absolutely. No, I agree. Absolutely. I agree entirely. And I was thinking the exact same thing. Every time I see somebody who tries to make a phone call and it doesn't work, you're like, you can text and like hide in a corner. Like if you're running away from somebody or whatever even, and they're like, oh, the call, they stop for a second to make a call. It doesn't work. Oh no. Like talk to text, right? So you're still running, hit the text button and then go. And then it'll get somewhere at some point, unless the phone gets destroyed or no, I agree. And that's just Hollywood is still trying to figure out how the internet works. Anything that involves hacking or webcams, they're still trying to figure out how cell phones work. And you'd think they'd catch up, but it's only been, 16 years since they were prevalent? A little longer? 20 years?
It's just, there's the obvious solution there. When she pulls out her phone, instead of it being slightly damaged, just have it be completely broken. Yeah. And then the whole scene works. Like, It didn't take a whole lot of changing that scene.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'd like, beyond that, I mean, that was pretty much it. And again, these are pretty nitpicky things. Some of them are a little larger that I would just like, that I think would have made the story better or the show better. But I'm always going to have those things. Like, there's always more potential, and I'm sure there's reasons they don't make those decisions. But those are usually the things that bother me most. Where I was like, oh, you could have done this thing. Like, and it would have been such a small tweak. But at the same time, hindsight. You're saying that after having seen the finished product, of seeing what could have fit in, and as somebody who has created television, and yourself being someone who's created television, that's always the case.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because you just got to get it done. I mean, it's a miracle that anything ever gets on the air, ever.
And, I think that's why the cell phone thing bugged me so much, because I understand when you have an entire plot line and when you're finished with it, and you look back on it and go, oh, we could have done this other thing, but it would require you to redo the entire production, right? Whereas the cell phone thing, it's literally like a 10-second script change. It's nothing that they would have to redo a whole lot of work for. It's just such an easy fix.
It's a PA saying, hey, I can just step on this right now.
Yeah.
Like I have a prop.
Exactly.
You want me to step on it? 'Cause I can just step on it. And you don't have to do that because she could text. And they're like, no, we want the cops outside. We need to be able to cut to the cops again to have action outside. Be like, why don't you just do that? And they're trying to call and it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's an easy fix. So that one bugs me.
Yeah, it's just they needed some way of knowing that she was in there, I guess. I don't know. But it would have worked to have one of the hostages say, yeah, the whatever her name. Yeah. Anyway, so as far as the characters go, well, I guess I can go characters. As far as the characters go, was there anybody there that stood out? I made a very sort of short list of Luke Cage, Misty Knight, Shades, Mariah, Zip, just because Zip was always there in the background, Claire Temple, Bobby Fish, Diamondback, Cottonmouth, and Scarf, Detective Raphael Scarf. Is there anything? I feel like we've done a decent job of sort of talking what we liked and didn't like, but is there anything there that stood out that you wanted to cover? Like, we haven't really said anything about Misty Knight, and she's a huge part of the show.
Yeah, so I really liked Claire. We already talked about that. I really liked Cottonmouth, and we talked about kind of the differences between villains, but Cottonmouth worked really well for me. The only other one on the list here that we haven't touched on that I think is worth the time is probably Misty Knight, because I wasn't sold on her at first. It took me a long time to warm up to her character, but by the end of the season, I liked her. And I kind of liked how she fit into the story, just retroactively. It kind of had to earn the place in it, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. I thought it was a little ham-fisted how we got her backstory. The whole, you got angry at somebody, so now we're going to sit down in front of, if it was internal investigations or whatever, and talk all about her history and get her backstory and that sort of thing. I liked it better when it was things like the basketball scene where she walks in and be like, fine, I'll play you for it, whatever. And she points down to the ground where there's the initials there. And she's like, this was my court once too. I was like, that is the perfect way to give us part of a backstory to the character. Now we know she knows the neighborhood. She grew up here. She was also a basketball player, but I didn't need all of the backstory about how she was amazing and being pushed to do basketball. And, I feel like when it comes out more organically like that, or just of course, I know Pop too. Like, you just showed up here. I've lived here my whole life, and now I'm protecting it the right way.
Yeah, I liked her as a character a lot. She really worked for me. And I think if I went back and I rewatched the whole season again, I would like her more the second time around, because now I understand her. I understand like kind of her character arc, where she's coming from and where she'll end up. And I think it would make me appreciate her more in the early episodes, which I didn't really at the time.
I think that's a really good call. Yes, I agree. I think going back and seeing it a second time would give you more appreciation for her character, because she was always sort of there, but this is a show with a lot of different people running around. It is not as simple as Jessica Jones or Daredevil, which I feel have fewer players. There are fewer pieces on the board than there are in this show.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, you're right. There's absolutely more characters and maybe even more locations going on too. There's just, it's kind of scattered out more than the other Netflix MCU shows. And it kind of has to be because of the story they're telling. They're trying to tell a story about a community, so you have to show more of that community to get a better appreciation of it. So it makes sense, but it's also, it's not as focused on individual characters, which gives it a different feel.
It's far more Game of Thrones, where you're like, now what's happening over here? Because you have like Misty and Scarf at the, police station, and then you have Claire Temple figuring out her thing, and then you have, Cornell and Mariah doing the family thing with the club, and there's Shades in the background, but then we're following him a little bit, and then Diamondback comes in, and then there's also Luke, who is supposed to be this thing that ties everything together. And so there's so many different stories and things going on that it is almost like a Game of Thrones, where you can be like, oh, well, I really like Jon Snow, but I'm not as big a fan of, the Daenerys Targaryen storyline kind of thing. It almost has that sort of feel. And so in that, I hope that Misty doesn't get lost in the mix too much, because she isn't as stand out of a character as Cottonmouth or Luke or Diamondback. She's the one that gets more swept up in things and is dealing with them, sort of like Claire, but Claire, I think, sort of stands out just because it's such a great character and a great acting job.
Yeah, the other thing that I liked with Claire, what I don't know if we mentioned when we were talking about her, was the nod to the other shows. And especially in Luke Cage, it was very subtle. Like when she mentions that she knows a lawyer, right? She's talking about Daredevil. And then at the very end of like the last episode, when she tears off the martial arts thing, like I don't know enough about Iron Fist, but I know that that's got to be hinting towards how she's going to meet Iron Fist, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I figured as much. I like how she's the glue that's binding them all together, and I'm interested to see how that finally happens.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, I think all the characters were done very well. I think the whole Scarf being secretly a bad cop, I thought that was fine. I thought, again, it might have been one of those twists we didn't necessarily need. I know it was to help Misty Knight push forward, and I think it was one of those. Because it was so spread out, they had to give each character their own arc, which meant putting little twists and turns into each character's story. Luke gets shot and finds out that he's not bulletproof. Misty Knight finds out that her partner, is an inside man for Cottonmouth. Cottonmouth gets killed by his own sister. Everybody kind of has these little twists and turns in their own story. And so maybe that's why they felt unnecessary to me overall. And that might have also been because you're binging the show. And so you're not getting those twists and turns spread out where you're like, oh, I can't wait to find out what happens to Daenerys. And then, oh, no, something happened to Daenerys. Okay. And then it's going to be another 2 weeks or more before some big twist happens to another character. Maybe it was the fact that they all came too fast,
That could be it. Because, yeah, I never really had to wonder and, like, what's going to happen and anticipate because I could just start the next episode, and I did, Like, yeah. I flew through it so fast.
So that very much could have been it. Is there anything else you want to say about any of the characters in particular?
Well, it was a question, and I think you might have this down in your trivia that we're going to get to, but I was going to ask about Luke Cage and his origin. So in the show, he's from Georgia, but in the comic, was he like from Harlem? Was he a local?
Yes.
Okay, because it seemed like I could tell that there was something with his origin there that they had changed, but I wasn't sure exactly what was going on with it.
Yeah, I don't know why they decided to make him from Georgia unless it was simply the ties to growing up in the South with a preacher for a father kind of thing.
Okay.
Rather than
maybe
growing up on the streets of New York as a gang member.
That's an interesting change. Like, yes, I don't know. It didn't feel necessary. It felt like they could have done it another way and had him been a local from Harlem. I don't know if that would have worked better. It just seems like they could have done it if they wanted to.
I agree. I also am not sure about the change, but again, maybe it's just there's a lot of ties culturally, with the South and Georgia, and so it might have just been trying to tie some of that in as well.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Maybe that was their way of defining why he is, such a straight arrow kind of guy versus having grown up on the streets of Harlem. Plus, it also makes him an outsider. So if they're like, hey, we can't make him grow up in Harlem because the whole point is he's new to the area and is being accepted into this community rather than having been here, grown up, and everybody knows him already. So we need to make him from somewhere else. Where do we want to go? I don't know. We're going to do the South. We're going to do the Southern, sort of Southern Baptist upbringing kind of thing.
Yeah, I can see that definitely being the way.
Yeah, and then that also allows for the religious slant that Diamondback has, which was wholly unnecessary in my opinion.
Yes, I agree with that too.
Just didn't need to be there. All right, are you ready to move into my massive list? We're already at about an hour of recorded time here, so...
Yeah, I think you can fly through most of the trivia stuff. I'm just going to sit back and appreciate it.
Cool. You feel free to interrupt me, and then at the end, if you have any other questions, feel free to throw them at me. I'll do my best, okay? So we're going to go... Trivia. So here is just a massive list of things that I made in no particular order of trivia and Easter eggs that I picked up, some on my own, some were ones that I didn't notice that I had to find out after the fact while I was looking online. So first, just an interesting sort of piece of trivia. This is the first Marvel feature anywhere, television, film, wherever, that actually uses the N-word. I think, obviously, this is one where I feel that it makes sense versus, like, you know, Iron Fist or Thor. Probably wouldn't work in Thor.
Probably not.
But it's just interesting that it's a place that they're going, because usually, obviously, it's meant to be more of a family kid thing. Next, all the episode titles are titles of songs by the East Coast hip-hop duo Gang Starr. That's it.
That's it. I had no idea. That's really cool, though, that they did that.
Yes, and it's not super uncommon. Sometimes you'll see miniseries in comics that will take lines from a comic book. I think it was like Maximum Carnage or something took each of the titles of each issue in that mini were taken from All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix.
Oh.
Like, so some of those things happen. It's common because you need to find a title for everything. But I just thought this was interesting, obviously because it all takes place on the East Coast, yada, yada, yada. So episode 3, where Misty tells Scarf, "You just broke my concentration," there's a theory that this is actually a reference to Pulp Fiction, where the actor that plays Scarf plays Brett, who is sort of that famous scene where he's sitting down and Samuel Jackson is pointing a gun at his face, you know, and that whole what scene of "say what again." That scene, if you know Pulp Fiction at all, is one of the lines from Samuel L. Jackson is, "I'm sorry, did I break your concentration?" So I think it's one of those.
It's like a very subtle tie-in.
Yes, and I think there's a lot of those as well. So to answer your question before, the end of the show, yes, is a tie to Iron Fist. Claire takes an ad tab for self-defense from Colleen Wing. In the comics, Colleen Wing does not have an alter ego, but she was a woman, first appeared in 1974, grew up being trained as a samurai, eventually becomes the best friend of Misty Knight, and they start a partnership as private investigators called Nightwing Restorations Limited, and then they are colloquially known as the Daughters of the Dragon. So as you have Luke Cage and Iron Fist, you have Misty Knight and Colleen Wing. And so they were constant sort of side characters that would help out Luke Cage and Iron Fist in the comic books. So I did sort of expect Misty Knight to quit as a cop at the end of the show. That would help lead to this. But maybe we just don't need that many private investigators, because that was very common in the comic books. Like, everyone was a private eye in the 70s. So she has no powers. Colleen Wing is not a superpowered individual, but sort of like Daredevil, she channels her chi to enhance her strength, accelerate her healing, etc. And then her thing is she has a 1,000-year-old sword that she uses and wears.
Cool.
So that's why when you see the trailer for Iron Fist, which came out at New York Comic Con, you see a woman in there wearing a sword. The theory is that's got to be Colleen Wing. And I'm sure I could confirm it by just looking up the name of the actress, but I'm not going to do that because I want to be surprised. I've been doing my best to not do that. As much as I like looking at news for upcoming shows and movies and stuff, I also kind of want to see it in the movie. I'm a little too scared of everything getting spoiled for me.
Yeah.
At least, if it's not in a trailer. Trailers are going to do it too, but... Okay, so comic stuff. Diamondback. In the comics, Diamondback was Luke Cage's best friend growing up. They were in a gang together with Shades and another dude named Comanche. And I think we can all understand why he was not included in the show. Shades was also one of Luke's friends, as well as Diamondback growing up, which is kind of interesting. We'll get to we'll get to Shades in a second, because he has a very interesting story in the comics as well. So I had said in the primer episode that Reva Connors, as far as I knew, was not a comic book character. I was wrong. However, she only lasts for 2 episodes, I think, or 1 episode. Maybe she dies in the first one. Diamondback was dating Reva Connors when they were kids or teenagers. And then she eventually leaves Diamondback for Luke. And this is when Diamondback frames Luke by putting drugs in his apartment. You with me so far?
I am. I'm seeing it all tied together.
So then in the comics, the Syndicate, which is the organization run by Cottonmouth, goes after Willis. They go after Diamondback because if you remember from the primer episode, Willis, this is Diamondback. I don't want to keep confusing names. Diamondback steals the drugs from Cottonmouth to put in Luke Cage's apartment. They're stolen drugs.
That's right.
So then Cottonmouth goes after Diamondback and ends up killing Reva Connors. So this is when Reva dies. It's not this huge backstory of her saving Luke Cage from anything. It was just his girlfriend growing up. Then he gets arrested, thrown in jail, and finds out that Reva was killed by this fight between Cottonmouth and Diamondback. Now, as far as the character in the comics, he does look the way he looks in the end. He didn't have the helmet, but he does have the green suit with the yellow sort of striped thing in the center, very snake-looking. His whole thing is that he throws knives, and some of them explode. And so eventually Diamondback works his way up in the Syndicate, the same organization Cottonmouth is in. And then when Luke Cage gets out of prison and he starts messing with the Syndicate, Diamondback gets these special knives that can hurt Luke Cage. So in this one, it's a bullet, which I think makes a little more sense. And I like that they tied it back. They took the comic story of Diamondback getting something that can hurt Luke Cage, right? And I like that they're like, how can we adapt this to the MCU? They're going to be bullets made out of material we got from the Jatari. Like, I liked that. I don't know why it was like a drill thing or whatever, but I like that they were able to adapt it that way instead of a dude who has throwing knives. So then this is when Diamondback kidnaps Luke Cage's new friend, Claire Temple, in order to bring out Luke Cage. And this is the point where Diamondback learns that Cage was actually his childhood friend. He didn't know at this point. He was just this superpowered guy messing with them. So he finds out that they were actually friends in their childhood, finds out who Luke Cage really is. They fight, and then at the end of issue 2, all of this takes place in 2 issues of the comic. At the end of issue 2, Diamondback dies when he falls through a skylight and then gets blown up by one of his own trick knives.
Wow.
It sounds complicated, but keep in mind, early Marvel comics, not early, but 70s Marvel comics, you could really fly through a storyline. They didn't take the time to sit and dwell on the little details or stretch out a story.
Yeah, they just went through it super quick.
Yeah, but that's where we get Claire Temple gets worked in, Reva Connors gets worked in. That is the actual comic book history between Diamondback and Luke Cage. There is no superpowered suit, and they don't duke it out in the street. They're not brothers. They were just best friends growing up, and then he's, it's I framed you because you stole my girlfriend. Now you're coming back and messing up the organization I'm a part of. Oh my God, you're the friend that I put in jail. We're angry at one another. We fight, and I blow myself up.
Yeah, it seems like they did a good job adapting it for the media that it's going to be in.
Yes.
In the Marvel MCU, it fit better. And knowing that it came from that story, it actually makes me appreciate the story we did get because it's less crazy.
Yes. We're very much, we can talk about how it seems so weird in the show and like, why did they do this? And this seemed odd. And then you find the actual comic history and you're like, oh, no, that was fine then.
Yeah, exactly.
So we already mentioned this. Luke Cage was not a cop, nor was he a Marine in the comic book. And then I see your question about Harlem. We addressed that one, right? Obviously, we do have Pop calling Luke Cage Power Man, and then he refers to himself as Power Man again later on. So that was nice. It was nice seeing the original costume. In one of the trailers, we saw you had the sort of tiara and the headband or in the armbands as part of the experiment. I thought it was funny. Obviously, it was that random grabbing clothes, and I think I've seen it in something else, and I can't remember what. But the randomly grabbing clothes off the clothesline and it turns into a version of a character's costume.
Yeah, I liked that a lot too. I laughed.
That sounds familiar to me. I want to say there was something else where we got to see that briefly as well, and I can't remember. I'm sure it happened at least 8 times in Smallville, because Smallville was always teasing the Superman costume. Also, just a nice nod to the comics, is Sugar, one of Cottonmouth's men, calls Claire Night Nurse. So we officially at least have somebody calling her by her comic book name.
Yeah, I did catch that one. I was proud of myself for catching that one after our discussion.
Yes. So Black Mariah, as far as a couple different things for Black Mariah. First, this actress has already shown up in the MCU, and I thought she looked familiar. In Civil War, she plays Miriam Sharp, the mother who confronts Tony Stark by the elevator at the beginning of Civil War.
Oh, yeah.
Same actress. Right. So I found it interesting that they decided it was a small enough role that they could reuse that actress in the universe and have them be completely different, unrelated characters.
Huh.
And I thought that worked well. But let's talk Black Mariah in the comic books. As far as I'm aware, not at all related to Cottonmouth. That was for the show. And essentially, like, look it up if you want to feel bad about the state of comics in the 70s. She is basically a really, really racist depiction of an incredibly heavy-set black woman. Like, just a massive, huge woman who speaks just like you would think a white writer in the 70s would write a black woman.
Ugh.
So, really happy with the changes they made. I thought it was great. And I love that only once is she called Black Mariah. And she says, "Don't call me that." So we got a nod to the comics, but very different character, especially with the political angle. But I thought that was great. I really, really liked the version of the character, even though she really had next to nothing to do with the comic book version. It was just a nod to the fact that there was a character called Black Mariah in the comics.
Cool.
Misty Knight, she gets shot in the arm. We hear about how she was almost going to lose her arm, may lose her arm. I love that. That was such a tease for comic book fans, because in the comics, she does lose an arm after an explosion, and then she gets a sweet robot arm built for her by Tony Stark.
Oh, man, I want her to have a robot arm now. I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah, so sort of super strength, but it's only with the robot arm. She never gets superpowers or anything. But yeah, that's how they sort of make her more superhero-y, I guess. And so we didn't get that. As moving on with other characters sort of in their comic book versions, Shades. So in the comics, Shades actually has sunglasses that shoot laser beams. So let's be thankful that this did, again, 1970s, everybody has powers. So I'm going to let that sink in for just a second. You said you weren't quite on board with Shades. At least he didn't have laser blasting sunglasses.
At least he's not a knockoff Cyclops, I guess.
Right. But his name was Shades, so he had sunglasses, but it's comic book, so his sunglasses have to do something, you know?
Yeah, of course, I guess.
So in the comics, eventually, Shades goes straight, and he has a son, and his son grows up to become the next Power Man, which I think is really cool, because you have somebody who was friends with Luke Cage as a kid, is a villain for a while, decides to go straight, and then his son becomes the next Power Man. I love that sense of
I can see it.
Continuity. And then if you've ever seen the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, the Power Man design in that show is the costume that the new Power Man wears, the younger, like, teenaged Power Man.
Oh, cool.
And Luke Cage, I guess, is just known as Luke Cage now. Maybe nobody calls him Power Man anymore. Obviously, there was a Stan Lee cameo, episode 12. You know, See a Crime, Report It poster. Did you catch that?
No, I didn't, actually. I usually catch them.
There's a poster on side of I saw it immediately. It's just one of those faces. So it's just a poster on a wall as they're panning across. It's on the side of a brick building, and it says, "See a Crime, Report It," and it's a picture of Stan Lee as a police officer.
Aw, I like that. That's a nice, subtle inclusion where he doesn't actually have to say something and, like, distract you from it.
Right. Another difference from the comics, Luke Cage not swearing, really. You know, again, being a very straight-laced, straight-arrow kind of dude in the show. In the comics, he curses up a storm. You know, I don't know if that's changed over the years, but... And again, it's the 70s version of swearing, like how Wolverine used to say flaming instead of the F word.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of thing. Yeah, Luke Cage had a potty mouth on him. And again, I think that part of that was the blaxploitation, you know, angle on the character. Going back to Misty Knight, at the very end of the show when she's in the bar, and that particular hairstyle specifically, straight out of the comic books, and then the clothing that she's wearing, where it's that red shirt that has sort of the cut-off shoulder tops, that is the Misty Knight costume that people are familiar with from the comics.
Is that like the very last shot of her from the scene?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
When she's at the bar and she's looking up at Mariah, or whomever was, I think it's Mariah.
Yeah.
Up on the balcony. Like, that is... So, basically, this is also a Misty Knight origin story, with the exception of her not having the metal... The robot arm, which, like, hey, and they had mentioned this on the Fat Man on Batman, the Kevin Smith podcast. They brought up the idea. They're like, well, we know that robot arms exist in the MCU. We have Winter Soldier.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, they are already there.
They took off his arm at the end of Civil War, so there is at least a partial metal arm lying around somewhere.
It's a good one too, as we've seen,
and it's the good one.
It's
so,
not,
but just saying, the technology
one.
is out there and it exists. I don't know how you would work, you know, Wakanda into Luke Cage.
No.
So I don't see her getting the metal arm. I think they're trying to stay too street level without getting into the bigger superheroics. So I don't see the Defenders really mixing it up with the Avengers. I feel like they're going to try and keep those pretty separate.
I would love for there to be minor crossover later. It doesn't seem like it's the time yet. It seems like they all have to come together on their own. They have to become the Defenders, and we have to have more after that. But it would be cool if, I mean, even if like they never make it into a movie with the Avengers, just some kind of acknowledgement that this exists and it's the same universe as the main movies, you know? Because you see it
Right.
the other way. Like you see the like they call it the incident in Luke Cage. You know, there's that kid that's selling DVDs or tapes or whatever on the street.
Right.
With footage from the attack on New York from the Avengers. And it would just be cool to see a little bit of hint of the other way too, where in some movie, even if it's a minor thing, just acknowledging the Netflix MCU.
Yes. And what I would love, and I know, it would cost a lot of money to get all the actors and stuff, but if you do another big level or New York thing, just like you do in the comic books when there's a massive crossover, is you just get single panels of other characters around the world reacting to something happening. So it would simply be a shot of, Daredevil punching somebody in the face and then looking up at the sky because the sky is turning green.
Oh, yeah. You could do something like that, just as a very minor nod. Yep.
Yes. And we have had little things. I think it was Age of Ultron where they mention Stephen Strange as other people that are of interest. And there was a piece of news in my last regular episode where Jeff Loeb, who runs the Marvel TV, just simply said, stay tuned. He didn't confirm or disconfirm whether or not there'd be any sort of crossover between Netflix and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
I saw that too, yeah.
So my thought is, again, it'll be like what you're talking about. There's going to be a slight mention. Somebody's going to be like, there's all these other people over in, Hell's Kitchen or Harlem, or, there might be some small mention like that.
Yeah, like, did you see what's happening in New York type of thing? I don't think it's going to be to the extent that DC is doing stuff on the CW now, where, like, characters are having multi-part episodes that go between the different shows. Like, I don't see Marvel ever getting to that point, but I do like when they do the subtle nods to each other to acknowledge that, hey, we're all in the same universe. We know these other events are going on.
We're like in Luke Cage, they say, they're claiming mind control. How ridiculous. Like, there's just a throwaway line to somebody clearly using superpowers of mind control in Jessica Jones.
Yeah.
Next thing that I have is there was a dumpster. This is small. This is like super background thing that I totally didn't see.
Okay.
There's a dumpster, and it's Timely Trash is the name of the company. And Timely Comics, and it has the Timely logo on it, which looks sort of like the original Captain America shield. It's the shield with the American flag sort of design on it. Timely Comics is the original precursor to Marvel Comics.
Oh, that's interesting. I had no idea, and I didn't catch it at all.
So I believe Timely Comics actually was the ones that put out Captain America. Don't quote me on that, but Timely Comics was original, and then Marvel Comics was actually one of their titles. Marvel Comics #1 was the introduction of the original Human Torch and the Submariner.
So what dumpster was it in? Like, what episode? Is it when Luke Cage puts the guy in the dumpster and kind of like traps him in there, maybe?
It might be.
Okay.
I didn't write it down. It was just a still image from the show, and I was like, oh, that totally is the Timely logo. That is super deep cuts.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. Other things, Detective Scarf is actually a character from the comics and was actually Misty Knight's partner. But that was all the info I could get out of that. So
Okay.
It might have been a single issue introduction before she went Private Eye. I don't know. But it was just kind of neat to know that that was an actual real character, not just a fabricated male partner for Misty Knight just 'cause.
Yeah, it's like when they actually have the stuff to pull from, it's nice when they just use it, when it fits.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you have to adapt it, sometimes you change it, but when it fits in with the story you're telling, why not just use what's already there?
And that would make it an interesting twist then if you are a big fan of the comics and you're like, oh yeah, totally, that's Scarf, that's Misty Knight's partner. And then, the big twist is that he's evil or whatever, that he's the inside man for one of the villains.
Right.
And I wonder, I didn't think of this again until now, is he eating all the time? Like, is that an inside joke with his name being Scarf?
I don't know. I didn't pay attention enough. Like
'Cause
Brad
I know
Pitt
there's-
type of thing, or...
Yeah, where there's like the scene at the desk where he's eating Chinese food. I'm trying to remember if we see him more often than not eating something or picking up food.
Maybe.
That's the thing to go back and watch. Or I tell you, if you're still watching or you just finished, let us know. Head over to the subreddit or find us on Twitter or something and let us know.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I have one final thing, and I love this because this is super deep cuts and no one would notice it. unless they were this type of person who pauses the screen for everything.
I love this one. I saw it on some site after the show was out. I know what you're going to talk about.
So when Misty Knight is scrolling through headlines looking for background, there is one article on one of the papers she scrolls past that references local inventor Martin Brown and his thrust capacitor, talks about how the inventor came under fire in 1985 for including a teenage boy in his experiments.
So good.
And then there might have, yeah. And the thrust capacitor was for, I don't remember what it was, a watercraft or something. And then they might have mentioned time travel or something in the article as well. So, but just that someone somewhere who is responsible for creating the props snuck in some Back to the Future stuff in there. I love that kind of stuff.
I love it too. It's so good. I loved that one when I saw it.
Yeah. And so that is it. That is my giant list of Easter eggs and trivia and then comparisons with the comic book to sort of clear those things up. Is there anything else that you saw or wanted to know? Any other questions you have that I might be able to answer after seeing the show?
I guess it's more, I like it overall. I think we covered all the main things I wanted to talk about too. I wanted to ask you, just because you have a deeper comic book background than I do, you have more context. How do you see, like, with where this season ended, do you have any better idea how they're going to come together as the Defenders? And I know we're still missing Iron Fist, but we have a lot of the pieces of the puzzle now. I mean, it's obviously going to involve Claire, but, like, do you have any other ideas just with, like, the background and knowing Luke Cage and the other heroes and stuff? Do you see a way forward that makes sense? That's kind of obvious now?
That's extremely tough, and I think the answer is no, outside of the fact that we know that Sigourney Weaver is going to play the villain, and I assume it's going to be mob-related. I think that has to be the unifying factor, is something that will affect Harlem and Hell's Kitchen and wherever Jessica Jones is. Is it Brooklyn?
It might be. That sounds right.
The Bronx?
Yeah, maybe. I don't live in New York, so I'm not the best authority.
Yeah. So it's going to have to be something else that affects it. How Jessica Jones gets tied in is the thing that I think is going to be the toughest, because she is not she would have to just be investigating whatever is happening, or they'd have to reach out to her for help doing some sort of private investigation, because her whole thing is she doesn't get involved.
Right.
She's not a crime fighter. That's not her thing. Daredevil, certainly, he'll go after whatever he thinks is going to affect the 4-block radius of his neighborhood. Luke Cage, being a defender of the city of Harlem or the borough of Harlem. Iron Fist, I don't know much about at all. I worry that our catalyst is going to be a Phil Coulson moment where Claire gets killed.
Oh, I hope that's not it. I like her as a character a lot.
But it's the one character everybody knows, so to bring them all together, you need a catalyst. And I don't know that with these characters, it's just going to be, hey, bad things are happening, here's the call to action, Avengers Assemble kind of thing.
I would rather have it be like almost a little bit more like pulling teeth from them, where like you really have to work to get them together, because none of them really like working with other people, but they eventually do it reluctantly. Like I don't want them to have to like kill someone and suddenly, okay, we're all in, Right.
Well, we talked in the primer episode, the Defenders were an anti-team, or a non-team.
Right.
So the whole point of the team is it's a group of loners that normally don't work with one another, who kind of have to in those situations. Yeah, it's just the idea of seeing Jessica Jones. Like, I can't picture an airport fight from Civil War that involves Jessica Jones running in line with other people towards another line of people running back the other direction.
No, not at all.
It just doesn't fit. So I very much look forward to what sort of even plot structure it's going to be. Because Daredevil is, I'm going to run at you and fight you. Luke Cage is, I'm going to stand there and let you empty your gun, and then I'm going to swat you in the head. Iron Fist, I imagine, appears to be, I'm going to jump punch a door down, which I don't... Maybe I don't understand the science behind jump punching. But I've never understood. I've always thought that you're putting your momentum behind you. But I've always looked at jump punching as being like one of the least effective things you can do, because I thought when you throw a punch, it's because you're anchoring one of your feet, you're rotating your whole body and putting all of your weight behind it, throwing your shoulder into a punch. And this is, I'm not a boxer. I've never, I took like a year of karate as a kid because everybody did, because Karate Kid existed. But that's, You know what I mean? I don't know. But it shows him jump punching like a steel door down or something. So clearly between him and Luke Cage, it's not I just see Jessica Jones as dealing with an issue as little as possible.
Yeah, I'm just excited to see how they all come together. So I'm still excited for Iron Fist, even though the trailer that came out was kind of generic and didn't tell a whole lot of anything at all.
No.
But the other shows have been good. So, I mean, it's in the same world. It's the same probably showrunners, whoever's in charge of the Netflix MCU. So I'll see it. I'm excited for it.
Yeah. So final thoughts. Ba-da-da-ba. I don't know if I need to do that. I don't do these different format for me. So
I know.
I don't know about a voice thing. Wow. Final thoughts. Where does this show rank amongst? Let's do it by season. Let's do Daredevil season 1, season 2, and Jessica Jones.
Yeah.
So this is now the 4th season of a Marvel Netflix show. Where does this rank for you?
It would go. My least favorite would be Daredevil season 1, which I know you really like, and that probably hurts you a little bit. But
that's fine.
Yeah, I don't like that one. It's slow. It's inconsistent. I think it has a bunch of different directors, which is why it feels very different as it goes along. But it's also just a huge long origin story, which I don't love origin stories that drag on. So Daredevil season 1, and then Luke Cage would go right above that for me. And then Daredevil season 2, I liked a lot. A lot of that comes down to the Punisher was a great villain. And then Jessica Jones, I still think is the best one. Jessica Jones resonated with me more than anything else. And I just think that that's one of the coolest things that the MCU has done. And maybe it's that it's darker. It deals with a lot more adult themes than anything else in the MCU. But I still think Jessica Jones is my favorite.
Okay. I have absolutely no idea how to rank them, personally. Because I don't want to put anything at the bottom. You know what I mean?
That's the hard part, because they're all good. Like, you're putting them in order, but it doesn't mean that the bottom one is bad. It's just in the context of the Netflix MCU, which is all pretty good.
Because I might put Daredevil season 1 at the top, just because it brought us in. I don't mind an origin story when it's done well. And there's just some stuff in that show that I think stands head and shoulders above everything else, both for emotional impact and just style and stuff. I also like the Daredevil opening credit sequence. I suppose that's something that I didn't bring up. Not a fan of the Luke Cage opening credit sequence. Like, I get it, and I thought it was cool, but I don't know. I guess just because the whole thing is one shot of him punching a wall, that it seemed very slow. Even though, like, the dripping blood or wax or whatever of the Daredevil one, I think I might put Daredevil season 1 first. I might just do Daredevil 1 and 2, then Jessica Jones, then Luke Cage.
Okay.
Which is tough, because there were things I loved and then things I didn't like about all of them. Jessica Jones pulled me straight through. Like, I binged the heck out of that, same as I did with the Daredevil shows, and I really enjoyed it. I think maybe it's just I am more drawn to the internal struggle that is in Daredevil. And Daredevil is certainly a little more superhero-y than any of the others, obviously.
Yeah, it definitely feels much more.
And I did totally kind of lose the first season of Daredevil when he gets the costume. I liked it when he just was wearing compression stuff. Obviously, he didn't need the huge flowy ninja tails on the head sock thing on the mask. But that was straight out of the comic books, out of the Frank Miller comics. But the emotional resonance, I think, clicked with me the most in season 1 of Daredevil, where it's just this, like, I can't stand to let this stuff happen. I have to go do something about it, but it's a thing I personally need to do. That whole, I need to let the devil out. I have this thing I have to take care of. Like, and I get that, there's a lot of different ways. Like, sometimes with music and stuff, if you're like, I gotta play music. Like, it's such an emotional release to do that thing. Mine isn't punching criminals in the face, but I think there's more emotion tied up in all of that. Like, Luke Cage is, I don't really want to do this, but this is a thing that needs to get done. Jessica Jones is very much, I don't want to have to do this, but I need to take care of this to move on with my life. And Daredevil is like, this is my life. It's very Batman. And I dig that so much.
Yeah, and a lot of it, I think what you're trying to get at is that, like, they're all good, but depending on your personal life experiences, like, everyone's gonna rank them differently, because different things are just gonna resonate with you better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because I understand a lot of the other ones, but I think that's also true. Like, I am not a black man who grew up in Harlem.
Wait, you're what? You're not?
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not. I know. It's a surprise. having been roommates in college, you didn't discover that.
Yeah.
I suppose you were in your room playing video games a lot.
I was. This is true. I think that's why Daredevil season 2 resonated with me a lot, is because of Punisher. Because Punisher, his entire motivation is driven by his family. And I have a family. Like, I have kids, right? Like, I related to Punisher more than anything else in Daredevil season 2. And I was really happy when they announced that Punisher is going to get its own series. Because I never had cared about Punisher before I saw that season of Daredevil.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it resonated with me. It worked.
And I think that's it. And I think that's the secret to the Marvel Netflix universe as it exists. They're hitting the right notes. Each show has a slightly different audience, and each season has a slightly different audience. And so they're hitting those. And that's also why Marvel is so successful, is because that's who their characters are. They are not their powers. They are the people behind the powers and their personal struggles. You know, so you have, because I guess that's very true. Daredevil season 1 is the frustration is you're seeing all these bad things happen to other people and you're not doing anything to help. You need just to do something to help because, you know, he's not seeing things, but he hears all of it.
Yeah.
You know, he's hearing bad things happen all the time and just he has to get out there and do something about it.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. But yeah, I like the whole Netflix MCU. There hasn't been a bad show yet, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Any other last thoughts? That seems like a pretty good last thought. Should we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
All right. So as usual, where can people find you, Void?
You can go check out the Geek to Geek podcast that I do with Professor Beige, who's also been on this podcast, and we just talk about whatever geeky topic of the week. And that's in your feeds. Just search whatever Geek to Geek podcast; it'll pop up. And besides that, you can find me on Twitter at grnmushroom, which is green mushroom without the e's, or I blog almost daily at agreenmushroom.com if you just want kind of an unending my impressions of whatever media I'm consuming, basically.
Cool. And of course, you can continue the conversation we're having right now if you head over to the Geek to Geek subreddit, which is /r/geek2geekcast.
You got it. Nailed it.
Yes. And all three of us of the Geek to Geek podcast network post on there. I'm not on there as much as I would like to be, but I try and keep tabs on there and talk comics and talk movies. We had a really good conversation on there about horror films and just horror, the genre in general, following the Geek to Geek episode. As far as myself, you can find me on Twitter at Rob's Comic Box. I also have a personal Twitter, which is at Knowby, spelled Knowby, where I post non-comic book related things, if that interests you. You can hit me up via email at thecomicboxpodcast@gmail.com. And of course, as we say, this is part of the Geek to Geek podcast network, so you can check out all of the shows at geek2geekcast.net. And then I have a link to all of them in the show notes as well. So thank you very much, Void, for joining me yet again.
Yeah, it was fun.
For a very long, I'm looking at the time here. This is going to be a long one.
Yeah.
Yeah. In any case, thank you so much for joining me. This was a blast. I look forward to doing it again with, if it's the next movie, and certainly video games as they come out. So we are going to close the comic box. And just as a warning, I have to check and see how this is going to, since it's such a long episode, I'm going to see what storage looks like. Depending on what storage looks like, it might be a full week before I do another episode, in which case we will catch you up on 2 full weeks of news and reviews. Void, are you going to join me this time? You say no every time. You want to join me with the closing it out?
Oh, no.
Lay down a beat.
I got to stay on brand.
You can lay down a beat.
I can't. Maybe if we're in person, if we do one of these in person, maybe.
Yeah. I'll tap along. We'll get you going. So we will go ba 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 ba. Ba 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 da da ba 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 da dum ba da da ba 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 da da ba da da ba da dum bum 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 rat ba da ba da bow bow ba ba da bum ba ba da bum ba ba da bum ba ba da comic box da ba da da Luke Cage da ba da da ba da da ba da da ba da da. Sweet Christmas.
Awesome.